Dr. Govender, and I would like to stop for a bit on what I think Mr. Billion said earlier about education, and how I couldn't agree more about a value-based education, one that does not just teach curriculum, indeed maths or English or grammar or literature, but teaches us indeed how to become leaders, how to aspire for more, and how to better the world around us. So that being said, dear all, depending on where you're watching this, because this is a global event, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It gives me too a great pleasure, and it honors me deeply to be able to address you tonight. And to me, it's absolutely amazing that we've all gathered here today, regardless of our background, of who we are, of what we do, of how old we are, to discuss a topic that unites us all, regardless of our differences or anything else. And that is education. And as I'm sure that you're fully aware, both from the conference booklet and from your own knowledge, the pandemic has wiped out 20 years of educational progress for children and young people worldwide. We have a lot of reports, we have a lot of data on the topic, so the topic is very clear. And if we were to say it without sugarcoating, we are indeed facing or approaching an educational catastrophe. As we all very well know, the past year has profoundly impacted educational systems all over the world. And I can speak from experience when saying that the most vulnerable and often underrepresented stakeholders were school students. So the main beneficiaries, especially school students coming from disadvantaged backgrounds or having some sort of disability. Studies have shown that more than 94% of the world's student population has been affected by lockdowns. It's a UN study that says that, made in 2021. And as we all know, besides that, the pandemic has definitely exacerbated the disparities when it comes to the learning opportunities that students have, and has drastically limited access to education for a great segment of school populations. That is the reality we're living in. But yesterday, I was listening to the addresses and the speeches given by world leaders in the UN General Assembly, and I couldn't help but notice that for most countries, education, so what we're talking about today, and one of the main core SDGs on the Sustainable Development Agenda, education is still waiting to become a priority, at least at a high decision-making level in most states. So all the leaders talked about the future and what great things it holds for all of us and the brighter tomorrow, but without addressing how we can actually truly get there through quality, inclusive, accessible education. That is the only way. When talking about post-COVID education, because this is the purpose of this panel, we do often hear people who talk about going back to normal. And that always makes me laugh, to be honest, because I think we have to ask ourselves what kind of normal it is that we want so desperately to go back to. We have seen, and we are currently seeing, that more and more countries at the beginning of this school year have chosen to implement hybrid education. And we have some very good examples, even in this panel, of schools that have implemented hybrid education and are continuing to do so, even if the infection rates at a community level are under control. So it's not just for pandemic reasons. And this is because states and individual schools have finally understood that digitalization is an inevitable process, which at some point will penetrate every single corner of our lives, and is currently penetrating every single corner of our lives. And that includes our schools, and we must not forget that. Most adults say about just young people and students and children that we are always on our phones, always browsing the internet, and saying that in a negative manner. So I think that we might as well use the internet and use the digital world to which we are constantly connected to our best interest, to our best educational interest. However, we of course cannot look away from the fact that online education poses an important issue, and that is the issue of access. And we're talking about infrastructure issues, lack of support from national governments, and financial issues, which most of the times make it almost impossible for an important segment of children to enter online classes and to actually take part in online education, no matter how good, how qualitative, and how well delivered it is. Um, as um, as Dr. Governor said earlier, I'm a board member of the Organizing Bureau of European School Student Unions of Voicu, and we have done research on the topic of post-COVID education and COVID education. And our research shows that during the pandemic, students and school students all over the world have lost their motivation to learn. And what's maybe even more tragic is the fact that some school students have even lost some of the key competencies which they had acquired before the pandemic. So we're not only talking about stalling when it comes to learning, but also decreasing in terms of key competencies. And for most of them, for most of these children, young people, school students, there is no going back. There is no revising the knowledge they lost, no repeating of the educational steps they missed. For most of them, this year and the past year as well will be known as the year in which education ended. And I want us all to be fully aware of the fact that this end, for most of them, is permanent. They will not, unless aided, be going back to school. But we know all of this. We gather in meetings like these, where wonderful people come and talk about the issues, and we talk about the issues. We all admit that we are facing huge problems, but this is not enough, not even closely. Not for us, and certainly not for the children and young students for whom we claim to feel so sorry. Sorry is not and will never be enough. Children and young people need action from each and every one of you, whether you are a politician, a business person, a scientist, an activist, or just a simple citizen. My belief is that students must be at the core of decisions when it comes to education, and young people must be at the core of decisions when it comes to our future, and not the way that is currently happening. Otherwise, because we are at a conference talking about the SDGs, otherwise, if we do not involve young people, if we do not involve children in decision-making processes, the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, will remain just that, goals that will never be achieved. And I'm absolutely sure that that's not what we want, not empty promises. So as a final sentence to say so, I would urge you with all my heart to listen to children and to involve them in decision-making processes at the earliest stage and as often as possible. Because everyone says that we young people are the future, but most of the times we are not only not asked, but almost ignored when it comes to designing it. And that is just unacceptable and unsustainable. Thank you.